In this lesson, we're going to focus our attention on understanding appropriate principles and concepts that are associated with IT security policy enforcement. Within an organization, having an appropriate IT security policy in place is important in ensuring that the organization is able to reduce and mitigate any vulnerabilities and threats. In order for this policy to be enforced, it's important that appropriate measures are in place to ensure compliance. And compliance ensures that policies are adopted and delivered in an intended way to ensure that IT security is enforced. In this lesson, we're going to talk about specific ways in which IT security policy should be enforced by an organization. You will want to keep in mind that we will focus our attention on being able to describe issues related to information system security policy implementation and enforcement. Key concepts will focus on organizational monitoring and enforcement of ISS policies, policy enforcement as it relates to compliance law, legal implications of information system security policy enforcement, as well as understanding who is ultimately accountable for risk, threats, and vulnerabilities. So in this lesson, we're going to discuss who is responsible for that IT security policy enforcement, what specific rights an organization has to enforce and monitor actions by users. We'll also understand some of the legal requirements and risk management components in order to ensure security policies are balanced. And we'll also discuss and go into detail on understanding the difference between laws and policies. Having appropriate support for IT security policy is important, and that we want to ensure that the policies are being enforced, because a number of different actions can occur if they're not. For example, it could lead to regulatory non-compliance for the organization's business domain. It could lead to further follow-ups in lawsuits if the issues aren't resolved. We want to ensure that enforcement of those security policies are ingrained throughout the organization. And so this should be done through appropriate training, as well as marketing and viability for all employees and hires. We'll also need to decide on what the organization wants to accomplish through the policy enforcement, and recognize appropriate conflicts and understand how employees can work to overcome those conflicts. And so in order for this to occur, it's important that executive management be involved in the process. Although executive managers have a lot on their plates when it comes to running an organization, it's important that executives are surrounded by employees that are supportive of appropriate security policies as well. So executives have to be able to overcome objections and persuade an organization to adopt those policies. They'll need to be able to lead the organization in the right direction to ensure that the organization is able to achieve their set out goals, as well as executive management is also responsible for being able to use the skills that they have to help motivate others, as well as share their values and knowledge. Executive management is also in place in order to help ensure that employees are traveling in the right direction when it comes to information security. And so executives want to be sure to send a clear message that there's a zero tolerance for ignoring security policies. And executives will also want to be sure that they provide support to ensure that the security policies are enforced in an appropriate manner. So one way that this can be done in an effective manner is to ensure that executive management is able to work with people and individuals to present data for proposals. Executive managers need to be able to direct their reports in a manner in which they're able to provide input and guidance on their behalf. And they should also be able to defer decisions to advisors and other direct reports. So with this in mind, executive support is going to be key to ensuring that security policy is enforced and persistent throughout the organization. And so it's also very important to understand the differentiating factors between governance versus management with regards to the organizational structure. So it's important to keep in mind that most employees are going to take notice if security enforcement comes from their leadership. So with this in mind, it's often going to be the case that executive management will need to be the face of enforcing appropriate security policies. So with this in mind, it's important to keep in mind that security teams can monitor for compliance, and then that non-compliance can be reported to leadership who can take an active role for enforcing the policies appropriately. So appropriate processes that are in place when it comes to governance versus management ensures that governance is in place to monitor, direct, and evaluate, and in which we're able to set the strategic direction for the organization. And then management processes are in place to plan, build, run, and monitor. And so this does require coordination between executive management and the IT support and enforcement, in that the governance processes are going to direct the management processes. And when monitoring and observing a security threat or a vulnerability, then that should be reported appropriately. And so with this in mind, it's important to keep in mind that governance committees are going to be serving more of a role in which they're monitoring those affairs, while management committees are going to monitor the activities before and after as part of running the operations. And so this means that we have to take into consideration how this affects compliance and what may be some other considerations to keep in mind. Both of the management components as well as the governance components are going to be able to work in tandem to provide appropriate support for monitoring and ensuring that compliance occurs. There are additional compliance reports that can be generated to ensure that the organization is in compliance, and also to ensure that if there is a vulnerability or a issue, that documentation is in place to identify the cause of that issue to ensure that it does not occur again. And so with this in mind, it's important to keep in mind that it is imperative that an organization stay up to date with the technologies that they use, as well as training of, of employees to be aware of new IT policies and how they should be enforced.